we are back with another Nancy Drew No Spoiler Reviews, and we are going to be reviewing 3 more Nancy Drew books in the series in this video. And today we are going to be covering books number 69, 70, and 71. So as always, I will have a link to my Etsy shop below if you guys like to have a reading checklist type of poster for reading through the Nancy Drew series. It has been something that I just really have been loving, and every time I finish a book, I get to put another sticker onto my reading progress chart, and it's just one of those things that like really keeps me motivated and helps me visualize my progress through the series, because as you guys know, in the main Nancy Drew series, there are 175 books, and that can be a really daunting task, and I am slowly but surely making my way through the entire series, and there's nothing I love more than watching my progress and putting those stickers on every single time I finish a book. So if you would like to purchase these for yourself, I will have a link to these in my Etsy shop. And as you guys also know, we like to track a few things throughout the series, so I will once again put the previous orphan counter up here, and we will see if we encounter any more orphans throughout these 3 books. So starting off with the first book, we have number 69, and this one is called The Clue in the Ancient Disguise, and this one was published in 1982. So the synopsis for this one reads, "The legacy of the French Revolution lives on in River Heights. Pierre Michaud, a handsome young Frenchman, has stumbled onto an ancient family mystery, and Nancy is convinced that the secret holds the key to a string of burglaries at the local museum. The truth lies hidden deep in the darkest vaults of the museum, where Nancy comes face to face with a ghastly figure out of Pierre's past. She unravels a fabulous tale of noble romance and aristocratic intrigue, and makes a startling discovery that could change Pierre's life forever." Alright guys, so for my bingo card for this mystery, I actually got 2 bingos this time. I was so happy. So I definitely picked the right bingo card for this one, especially since I feel like for the last several books, I have been getting those like near miss bingos, and I was so glad to finally nail not 1, but 2 of them. And once again, I do have these for sale on my Etsy sticker shop, and these are actually a digital download, and you can get 32 unique digital bingo cards. You can print them off as many times as you want, and you can play along while you're reading through the Nancy Drew books and see if you get a bingo of your own. So in this mystery, we actually do have 1 partial orphan. Once again, I will not spoil who the partial orphan is, but if you read the book, you will find out very soon. So that is 1 more to add to our orphan counter. And so as far as the story goes, it starts out where Nancy is involved in a case from her father, and a young Frenchman named Pierre Michaud reaches out to Carson Drew. Pierre finds a letter among his grandfather's effects that was from a woman in River Heights explaining she had some important information to share with him, and Nancy is on the case to help uncover what the letter was and what the message was. And meanwhile, Pierre is also a computer whiz kind of guy, and he is creating this new type of memory device. And he is a computer engineer, and he has created a new type of memory device for computers, and he is trying to get the funding to get it off the ground so he can make a new life for himself in America. But when Pierre tries to contact relatives of the woman who sent the letter to his grandfather, he gets a very cold reception from them. But when Nancy tracks down the relative, she also learns that she had an untimely death, and Nancy is trying to figure out what the message was that she originally sent to Pierre's grandfather 30 years ago. So the first thing I noticed is that they are actually reusing a last name for a character in this mystery that they literally just used in the previous book that I covered in my last Nancy Drew No Spoiler Reviews. That one was called The Elusive Heiress, and the name that they are reusing is the last name Thorpe, and that was literally a name they used in the very last book. So I thought that was kind of funny that they decided to reuse that name, especially like literally back-to-back books. I also have reason to believe that we could possibly have another orphan, but that one is not explicitly stated, and to not ruin the story, I will leave that one where it's at. So the letter sent to Pierre's grandfather was from a woman named Louise Duval, who has relatives in River Heights, which is her nephew and her great niece, and that is Lisa Thorpe and her father Norton Thorpe. And so we learned that Lisa actually works at a thrift shop with Bess, and this is the first time we've ever heard of like Bess having a job, which I thought was really funny. But I also thought it was funny that this like super mega rich girl is like working at a thrift store. And one thing in the story that kind of like reminded me was that, of course, Nancy has a dog named Togo, and we have not heard a mention of Togo in so long. I honestly can't even remember like the last book Togo was mentioned in. I feel like they just like completely forgot about him, but they do mention him in this book, but it's such like just a passing mention of him that like, oh, he was in the window or something like that, and then they never mentioned him again. But it has been so long since we've gotten a mention of Togo, and I really miss that. I wish they would kind of like work him into the story a little bit more, or even just like mention his presence like when Nancy's at home and stuff. But I mean, poor Togo has like just been disappeared and vanished for this entire last stretch of like, I don't know, 10, 15 books. I feel like he hasn't been mentioned in a long time. There should be like a Nancy Drew mystery that is like the disappearance of Togo. That would be quite funny. Now, the one thing that was kind of a little frustrating in this book is that Nancy is trying to track down this person, and every time she gets a lead of needing to track down another person to kind of like further the story, we find out that they're dead. It's like, okay, we need to go to person A. Oh, person A is dead, but they give us a hint to person B. Oh, but person B is dead, but they give us a clue to person C, but oh, person C is dead. So I kind of feel like it's a lot of like, oh my gosh, like kind of like circular logic that doesn't really kind of get you very far, but somehow it still progresses the story. But it was kind of frustrating. It was definitely kind of like a reoccurring theme throughout this story. I also put that like in this mystery, there wasn't really a lot of like Nancy really uncovering like clues on her own. Like a lot of it was all from hearsay, I guess I would say is the best way to put it. So she would go talk to someone, interview them, and they would say, oh yeah, you need to go talk to this person. And so it just kind of felt like the longest game of telephone ever, because it was just basically like, go talk to this person. Oh, they tell you to go talk to this person. Oh, and then they tell you to go talk to this person. And then they tell you to go talk to this person. So I kind of felt like that was a little bit of a really like heavy kind of plot device that was used throughout this mystery. And I didn't feel like Nancy was really like discovering a lot of things on her own. But then usually in these stories, we always have like an A plot and a B plot. And I feel like in this one, it wasn't really so much like A plot, B plot. It was really like one linear mystery, but then we had a lot of like really mini things kind of like offshooting off of the like main central mystery. And so there's actually quite a few like little sub stories that we're following along with too that do end up like getting resolved, you know, halfway through the book. This one gets resolved, and 3/4 of the way this one gets resolved, and like 1/4 of the way this one gets resolved. So I felt like this one didn't really follow necessarily the typical A plot, B plot, but more of like a central plot and then just a whole bunch of little like side things along the way. And I think this one is also supposed to take place in fall time. We don't really get that much mention until like kind of like, I don't know, at least halfway through the book. There was a mention of like fall time and like the leaves and the woods being beautiful, and we finally get like an idea of what time of year it's supposed to be. I also think that this one was kind of cute because we do have a little bit of like I would say maybe like several different kind of like little mini romance plots throughout the book, and we don't really get those a whole lot in the Nancy Drew mysteries, but I do kind of love when we do have like a little bit of a romantic kind of plot. So we definitely had that in this mystery, and it's definitely very heavy on like art and museums. And there was a scene in this particular story where Nancy is in the art museum after hours, I will say, and it was kind of one of those ones where like I'm picturing the scene and I'm just like actually feeling like anxious at what is going on in the moment, and I'm always thinking like, oh my gosh, how is Nancy gonna get out of this one? There was a really good scene in this one that involves the art museum and definitely had my heart pounding. Another thing that I actually really liked about this one is there was a pretty, I don't know, in my opinion, it was a pretty significant plot twist, and it was definitely one I did not see coming, and I love whenever that happens because, like I mentioned in the last book that I covered in my last Nancy Drew No Spoiler reviews in The Elusive Heiress, I felt like that one was so obvious of a mystery that nothing really surprised me, and I pretty much called that one like from the beginning. Like reading the synopsis, I could already see how the story was going, and I would have loved if they had done like a plot twist at the end that would have totally thrown the mystery on its head, because it pretty much just followed exactly what I thought it would be, and it's not necessarily as fun when that happens. So this one definitely had a bit of a plot twist at the end, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it because I definitely kind of had my suspicions on who it was, and I feel like I totally just got turned around, and I really love when that happens because I like the surprise of it. I do feel like, however, we did get like a really big info dump at the very end of this mystery that was very reliant on tying all the pieces together as far as the kind of like the history part of the mystery, if for a lack of a better term. And especially when we have these mysteries that are like kind of go several centuries back, I feel like we definitely do have to rely a little bit on Nancy kind of narrating the story to us at the end, which was definitely the case in this one. But I did find it was like a very like fun, interesting kind of story. And if you do have like interest in like the French Revolution or like European themes and you like art and things like that, I definitely think that you would enjoy this mystery. So for me, I do feel like the kind of whole backstory of this one was a little bit more of like a complex kind of mystery that you wouldn't necessarily just easily uncover on your own. So I definitely had to rely a bit on the Nancy kind of like giving the final speech, pulling it all together, but it was still a really good book. A couple other things that I mentioned, I completely didn't realize it until after I read the book, that this version of the book does not have any illustrations in it at all. And while I was reading, I completely forgot that there weren't any illustrations in it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Which is funny because the last one that I did was also one of the same kind of like covers as this one, and I think these are the minstrel books, but these ones did have some illustrations in it. Let me get to it. Yeah, like, so it's the same like cover design type style, but it did have illustrations in it, but then I realized that this one didn't, and I was kind of so sad. I did really miss the illustrations in that. I just really enjoy those. I also put in my notes there's absolutely no mention of Ned at all in this mystery, and I put it's probably because like since the mystery is kind of surrounding another kind of like young handsome man, I think that they didn't want like Ned as a character to like really kind of compete with Pierre in the mystery, so that is why there is absolutely no mention of Ned at all. And I also feel like Bess and George weren't as present in this mystery either. They weren't really that present in the last two, but they are just like a little bit more tangential in this mystery, but still it was a good one. I also put that I really liked the title of this book, which was The Clue in the Ancient Disguise, because I felt like it had a little bit more of like that traditional Nancy Drew titling kind of feel to it. Whereas I feel like a lot of the last few titles, I haven't really felt like they vibed a whole lot like with the mystery. Like, yeah, they made sense, but it just didn't feel like a Nancy Drew title to me. But this one definitely does. Like, Clue in the Ancient Disguise totally has that like ring to it. And also I kind of had a thought that the Ancient Disguise was referring to something else, but as you read the story you actually learn what it is actually referring to, and I kind of liked that little twist too, because I wasn't anticipating that, because especially with the cover art on here I had an idea at what I thought was the Ancient Disguise, but it turns out it actually isn't what it's referring to. So in the end I actually ranked this one 4 stars. I really do have a love of like art and history and French culture, and it's just kind of like all those things all wrapped up into one mystery. And I even kind of liked how it had a little bit of like the technology kind of vibe and theme to it as well, with Pierre being like a computer engineer, and so there was just a little bit of like modern meets like past and future all in one book. So I thought this was a really good book and I really did enjoy this one quite a bit. Next is book number 70. This one is called The Broken Anchor, and it was published in 1983. And the synopsis of this one reads, when Nancy Drew learns that she has won a holiday for 2 on an island resort, she is completely mystified because she had never entered any contest for such a prize. Her suspicions grow when an abandoned boat linked mysteriously to her and her father is traced to strangers at the same resort. More than ever, Nancy realizes she must contact her girlfriends, Bess Marvin and George Fane, who have gone to the island ahead of her. But unable to reach them, the young detective finds herself on the brink of yet another intriguing mystery involving a strange old medallion and a long-lost treasure. So starting off with my bingo card, another near miss in so many ways. There was 1, 2, 3 ways I could have bingoed if I had a single one marked off. Unfortunately, I didn't, so no bingo this time, but once again, so close. And as far as orphan counter, I do not believe we had any orphans in this mystery. Now you guys, please give me a lot of leeway on this one. It has been several weeks since I have read this book, and I am not gonna lie, it's not as fresh in my mind. I just had not had much time to film videos lately, and so I kept putting this one off, saying like, oh, it's okay, I'll film it the next time I'm batch filming some videos, and I just did not get a chance. So this one, please forgive me. And once again, my notes are not the best, so I am trying to get better at taking better notes and filming these right after I finish reading the books, but it just didn't happen for this one. So once again in the story, we have a quick trip to Florida, of all places. I swear Nancy has been to Florida so many times. I kind of roll my eyes every time she goes back to Florida now, because this is honestly like, what, the 5th or 6th time she has gone to Florida at this point, and I'm just kind of like, of all the places to go, let's diversify it just a little bit. But Nancy ends up making a quick trip over to, I believe it's the Miami area this time. Luckily, the story doesn't take too much time in Florida, but there is another quick Florida trip, and the rest of the book mainly takes place in the Bahamas, which was an interesting new kind of location, which does make this an international mystery. So like the synopsis states, Nancy receives a mysterious letter saying that she is the winner of a contest to have a trip for two to a resort, which is such a cool contest, not gonna lie. Funny quick story, have you ever seen like these little contest advertisements at the mall, and they're like, put your name on this slip of paper and give us your phone number and you could win a trip to the Bahamas? One time my boyfriend did that, and he got a text a few days later and was like, congratulations, you're the winner. And unfortunately I had to break my boyfriend's heart, and I'm like, babe, I don't think that's legit. I'm pretty sure they just text every single person who put their phone number and their name into that draw box. And I think it's some kind of like little, I won't say a scam, but it's definitely not like, oh, hey, you won. They just contact everybody. So my boyfriend was very distraught and very upset when I pointed that out to him, but in the end, I think it was the best choice. A lot of the times I think what they usually do is like, they'll contact you and they'll be like, oh, you're the winner, but you just have to pay for this, this, and this, and then you get like a discounts on everything. And anyway, I did have to kind of burst his bubble a little bit on that one time. This was several years ago, but afterwards he was like, yeah, I think you're right. So that was the first thing I thought of when I was reading this and Nancy won that contest. I was like, that sounds very familiar. So this one is kind of fun because it starts out a little bit more with Nancy and her father kind of being the duo in this mystery, and we haven't seen that in quite a while. I honestly can't even remember the last time Carson played like a super prominent role in one of the mysteries, but it's definitely been a while. But the interesting part is that Nancy is unable to contact Bess and George, and you are kind of like left in the suspense of like, oh my gosh, what happened to them? Where are they? And it definitely got really interesting because I feel like this story did have a little bit of a different vibe to it than a lot of the Nancy Drew books. While this one definitely still was like that mystery, like what's going on, this one kind of took a really interesting turn. So without getting too far into like the details of it, once Nancy actually gets to the Bahamas location, which is the location for the remainder of the book, I do have to say that the vibes were very different, and they almost kind of gave me this really chilling, unnerving kind of feeling, because it does have to do with like Nancy at pretty much, for the lack of a better term, an abandoned resort, and there's only a handful of other people around, so it definitely kind of gave me this really eerie feeling whenever I was reading this book, because it almost had a little bit of a, not quite like a survivory element to it, but definitely a interesting kind of vibe with being at like an abandoned resort and not having a whole lot of resources and things like that. So I did find that part of the book super interesting, and not something that we have seen too many times in the Nancy Drew book. Like I said, it's not so much of like a true like survival type of story, but there were little bits and elements to that kind of gave that vibe, and I just thought it was really interesting. Not to mention, of course, as always, the A plot, B plot strategy, the initial I guess, A plot that Nancy is investigating with her father and how it ties into the B plot was another really interesting type of plot line, I will say. This you learn very early on in the book, so I don't think it's that big of a spoiler by any means, but how Nancy ends up starting to investigate a missing boat, and it kind of gave me the chills because while they're investigating and how they kind of are linked to this in the first place is a series of newspaper clippings all about Nancy and cases she has solved. So that one kind of gave me the chills, like, and you have no idea like who it's from or like why they have all these clippings of you, but that would absolutely give me the chills. One thing that kind of confused me a little bit was like the time and the setting of this book, which at first it like kind of mentioned a few things, and so I wasn't quite sure like when it was supposed to be taking place, but I have since discovered that apparently the off season for the Bahamas is the summertime, which I would not have expected. I don't know, in my mind it like seems like summertime would be the heyday time of the Bahamas because people are like, you know, school vacations and like everyone goes on summer vacations and things like that, but apparently that is actually the off season for the Bahamas. I guess it has to do with like hurricane season or whatever, so apparently this takes place during the summertime, but that really kind of threw me for a loop because I would not have thought that that would have been the off season. So I think it was about 20 pages in, I think it finally mentioned that it's like June is when the story is taking place. And I do have to say there's also a character that Nancy meets when she gets to said location. And I'm not gonna lie, I kind of had my suspicions on this character for a bit. I was like, well, maybe this is going to be like some major plot twist red herring that I just didn't see coming. I will not say whether that is right or wrong because I don't want to spoil anything, but I definitely had some really, really strong suspicions on a specific character. And I thought it was really interesting how the story turns out. I do have to say that I feel like there could have been a little bit more of an interesting twist on the big reveal of the mystery, but I do think it was just really interesting at like how resourceful Nancy had to get in this mystery because she really did not have access to a lot of, you know, details or resources, you know, when it came to like either food or people that she could ask questions to or modes of transportation. There was really not a lot that she had to go on, so she did have to get pretty crafty throughout this mystery to end up solving it. And one of the main characters does end up going missing throughout this mystery, and so the others are trying to track down the missing person, and honestly it really kind of had me like so worried for this character. I was like, oh my gosh, where are they? What happened to them? How terrified would I be if I were in that situation on like an abandoned island with literally nobody to help you? But overall, I did really enjoy this mystery. This was one that I feel like the second half of the book was a little bit more interesting than the first half, even though I also think that the second half of the book was a little bit more limited in like I said, where they could go, what they could do, and what they were trying to achieve. It was a little bit more condensed, I will say. There's definitely a lot more going on in the first half of the book, but I think I enjoyed the second half of the book a lot more. The first half I was kind of like, okay, where is this going? What is going on? How are all these things going to link together? And in the end, I do feel like they did kind of link together, but it was another one of those cases where I always love a mystery when the villain is a little bit more woven into the story throughout rather than just showing up kind of at the end. So I will leave that where that is at as to not, you know, overly spoil anything. But overall, I did really enjoy this mystery. It was a really good, like, beachy, summery kind of slightly survival-y type of mood to it, which I thoroughly enjoyed and thought was a little bit different than a typical Nancy Drew book. So overall for me, I did rank this one 3 stars. I did pretty much enjoy it. Like I said, I think I liked the second half of the book a little bit more because it was really just trying to like figure out like how are they gonna pull this off, and in the end I think it was definitely a good one worth reading. I just really want Nancy to go somewhere else other than Florida. I don't want her to go back to Florida in the next 50 mysteries. So moving on to the next book, we have number 71. This one is called The Silver Cobweb, and this one was published in 1983. So the synopsis for this one reads, when a famous young woman disappears suddenly, Nancy Drew is faced with an even more puzzling mystery that involves the theft of a jeweled spider. Once the property of the opera diva Madame Arachneonitis, the gemstone had supposedly passed into the possession of an unscrupulous millionaire. He hired someone to mount it on a silver cobweb necklace, but the gemstone ornament turns out to be a fake. What has happened to the real jeweled spider, and who masterminded the theft and blackmailed the missing young woman? As Nancy investigates for answers, she is led to the offshore island estate of the late opera star's husband, whose life is being menaced by the same shadowy figure intent on trapping the young sleuth. So for my bingo card for this one, once again, I did not bingo, but I was 2 ways that I could have gotten a bingo, and I only needed 1 more space, so another near miss. But I do have to say, having so many of these like near misses just makes the cards where I actually bingo on them so much sweeter. So in this book, as far as the orphans go, we technically have, I'm gonna say we have 2 full orphans and 1 partial orphan. So first things first with this Nancy Drew book, there were definitely a few themes that I kind of feel like we have seen before in previous Nancy Drew books. One of the themes in this one that we have seen before is a very kind of like golf heavy theme. Now this one I will actually say it wasn't as heavy on the golf theme as the previous Nancy Drew book, which is all the way back number, I think it was number 15. It was called The Haunted Bridge. That one Nancy's taking place in a golf tournament at a resort, and that one was a little bit more heavy on the golf, but there's definitely some golf themes in this one as well. So we did see that. And another one we have seen a couple times before was definitely the motif of spiders, which I remember we had seen before in like the Sapphire Spider mystery, in The Clue in the Attic. And there's definitely been a couple more that we have had spider themes before. I'm trying to remember what else. There's another one, and I just for the life of me cannot remember. It's one of the really early ones though. It's definitely a really early one, but we definitely have a spider theme in this mystery. Now, once again, as always, a lot of Nancy Drews, they have the A plot, the B plot, and I typically consider like the A plot to be the first plot that is brought up in the story and the B plot to be the second plot in the story. But I do think that in this one, the initial plot that is brought up isn't as big until the very end of the book. You know, I think that the B plot, the second plot brought up, tends to be a little bit more of the focus throughout the book. Now I do have to say for this one, I don't know what it was. I think it was just timing of like not having a lot of time to read this book. I probably had to like pick this one up and put it down close to 20 times to complete this book. So of course, as you guys know, I always tend to enjoy the Nancy Drew books that I'm able to read in a quicker fashion. This was just not one of them. I had to like pretty much read it like 5 pages at a time, broken up so many times. So once again, my memory on this one is a little bit hazy, not because I read it a long time ago. I actually finished it last night, but from the start to the ending of the book was just so like broken up and interrupted. It was harder for me to get like a full connected like plot line all the way through in my brain. One thing I wanted to mention is like Nancy on the cover. Why does she have this crazy ass mullet? I don't know why they gave her that hairstyle, but it's really not my favorite. And I do actually have an alternate cover of this book, and I think Nancy looks a little bit more like Nancy on that one, but for this one in particular, she is rocking the like 80s mullet, and I don't love it. One thing I noticed in this book, the location of River Heights is, I think, very different than where it has typically been vaguely mentioned before. River Heights to me always kind of seemed like it was more Midwest, sometimes like around Ohio, possibly outside of Chicago, but this time River Heights is absolutely like without a doubt on the East Coast in this mystery, because they mention that Nancy ends up going to this town that is on the East Coast, like on the ocean, and it taking only about an hour's drive to get there. And Nancy actually makes several trips to New York City in this one, and it seems to be very quick, easy to get there type of travels. Like Nancy just takes the train, or she just drives to New York, or, you know, a quick short flight from New York. So it definitely seems that River Heights is absolutely on the East Coast in this mystery. But one thing I thought was kind of weird, Nancy does go to New York City a couple times throughout this mystery, but never once does she mention Aunt Eloise, which we know does live in New York City, but there was absolutely no mention of her this time. Even when Nancy stays in New York City, she doesn't mention her or anything, doesn't stay with her. So I thought there was a little bit of like a, not necessarily a continuity error, but just kind of like an out of place choice. Like it just would have made sense like if Nancy had like stayed with Aunt Eloise for a night while she's, you know, investigating in New York. In this book, we do have another callback to the Footlighters, which is the local theater troupe that Nancy has acted with several times before. The first time we had the mention of the Footlighters was in The Clue of the Dancing Puppet. And then we also got another throwback reference to, I think it was in Captive Witness. And then there might have been one more. I can't remember. Might have been one more like recently, but we do have another callback to the Footlighters, and they do make another appearance in this mystery as well. There was like a funny self-referential kind of comment that Bess makes in this mystery. At one point, she and George and Nancy are all together, and George talks about how hungry she is and ready to go eat, and Bess makes the comment saying that being hungry is her line, and she thought George was the one who never gets hungry. So I thought that was kind of funny because we always know George is always poking fun at Bess for being hungry or, you know, wanting to eat something, you know, as a normal human would, but she definitely takes it a little bit too far. But it was a little funny, kind of lighthearted comment of Bess kind of poking fun at George for once. So for this one, I really feel like the first half of the book, there are so many things going on and so many characters that are introduced that it really kind of like took me a while to get all the characters straight, because at first it's like Nancy's just going all over the place talking to so many people. It was really kind of like this big tangled mess of like, okay, what's important, what's not important, what's a red herring, how is this all going to tie back? And at first I just feel like the first half of this book was a little bit less organized in like the thought process of like how Nancy is trying to solve this mystery, especially since the first half of it is really focusing on the pro golfer who mysteriously drops out of a contest, and so Nancy's kind of enlisted to figure out why did she do that. And it definitely seemed more of like a bit of a personal kind of conundrum as to what Nancy is trying to investigate in the beginning, and the girl herself even is like, you know, hey, this is my personal life, leave me alone. And Nancy's just a little bit pushy on this one, where she's like really kind of looking into this girl's life who clearly is not wanting Nancy to do so. But I do feel like in the second half of the book is where a lot of it ties together. But I do have a little bit of a complaint, because most of the information dump of like how the mystery ties together with like the opera singer and the missing jewelry and all that stuff is pretty easily explained by two characters that are in the story for most of the entire book, and they just never talk about it. Like they know everything from the beginning, but they just don't want to talk about it. And then finally they're like, okay, I'll tell you everything I know. So I kind of feel like that's a little bit of like a lazy way to present all the information to the reader, especially since they kind of overcomplicate it with a whole bunch of moving parts of this went there and then this went to this person, but this happened to this person and then this one was this thing. And so, you know, they're kind of like doing so many, like, it's like the game of like a ball underneath all the cups, and they're just like continuously like moving the ball underneath all the cups. So there's like no way for you to really like follow the logic of the mystery. And it's just a whole lot of like, oh, you thought it was here, misdirection, it's actually over here. And so I kind of feel like in a way, it wasn't my favorite mystery with like all of the reveals, because it really just kind of comes out through dialogue rather than the reader trying to solve the mystery along with Nancy. And I just feel like we didn't get as much of that in this one. And honestly, for a while, I feel like the original kind of mystery that Nancy's following just really takes a back seat. So I actually kind of feel like the first mystery that is brought up tends to actually be like the secondary plot line, and you don't figure out like how it all ties in until the very end. And I do have to say, I feel like the final showdown scene that we have in all the Nancy Drew books felt extremely cut short, in my opinion. Like, honestly, I almost felt like I was missing a page or two just on how the story ended and how all the red herrings come out and things like that. So I just kind of felt like they could have maybe flushed out the ending just a little bit more to not make it as confusing or so cut short for the reader, because it definitely just left me feeling like, whoa, that was very quick and the story's over. So I definitely feel like the pacing was just a little bit off. Like, it felt like 3/4 of the way through we kind of get the big reveal, and then we have a few more pages of like just a few little loose ends to tie up, and then it's just like bam, it's over. So I don't know, I kind of feel like I just didn't love the pacing at the end of the book. And at one point, it's almost like we actually have like 3 individual mysteries, and then they all start like weaving in like a braid in 3 different strands, which all tie into the same mystery. But especially in the beginning, it just feels like there is so much going on, and it just felt like there were too many things that Nancy was juggling that all, of course, miraculously tie together in the end. Also, now that I have gone back and reread the synopsis of this book, now that I know the story, I feel like they actually kind of give away a lot of information in the synopsis. I always like read it before I read the book so I have an idea of like where the book is going. And then whenever I go back and read it, I'm like, they kind of told us a lot here. But while I was reading it, since it did take me so long to read this one, I felt like I completely forgot the back summary. So once I was reading it again, it like jogged my memory, and I'm like, oh, why didn't I see that coming if they told me on the back of the book? And that's because quite honestly, I forgot what the synopsis was. So overall, in the end, I think I would rank this one a 3. I think I would have ranked it a 4 had I read it a little bit quicker and had more of like a concise and cohesive understanding of the mystery, because I think I just couldn't get past the first half of the book, which was just so many things going on. I definitely enjoyed the second half of the book a lot more, and I liked it, but I don't know, it wasn't my favorite. When going into it, I was like, oh, I think I'm really gonna like this book because I enjoyed the last book so much that had a golf theme, which I really didn't think I would have enjoyed for as much as I did. But this one just, I don't know. It was a good one. It was a good one. It just wasn't my favorite. So I would give this like a 3. That's kind of like my middle of the road kind of ranking. So overall, yeah, I think a 3 fits this one pretty well. Alright guys, so that is it for these 3 books from the Nancy Drew mystery series, and I thought it'd be fun if I started like teasing the next 3 books that I'm going to be reading. Obviously I'm reading them in chronological order, so it's not like it's that hard to guess, but the next 3 books that I will be covering, I have number 72. This one is called The Haunted Carousel. I'm actually very excited to be reading this one because if you guys are fans of the Nancy Drew computer games, there actually is a game called The Haunted Carousel. So I will be very interested to see how similar this mystery is to the game, or if they are completely different stories just with the same name or the same vibe. I don't know if there's much crossover or not. It has been a long time since I have actually played the Haunted Carousel game, but I'm definitely looking forward to see if there's any similarities or not. Then next up we will be covering number 73. This one is called Enemy Match. And then for 74, this one is called The Mysterious Image. So those are the next 3 books I will be covering in my Nancy Drew no spoiler review videos. So I hope you guys are anticipating these. I am definitely excited to start reading these, and hopefully I will be able to read them in a much quicker succession than I have been for the last several books. Alright guys, so that is it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please like and subscribe. You can follow me on social media. Links are below. And until my next video, I will talk to you guys later. Bye.